Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back. So today we're going to be talking about the A7III. Recently I've been seeing a lot of people posting questions online asking whether or not the A7III is still a good camera to pick up in late 2019, early 2020. I've also been seeing people ask whether or not it's a good camera for professional work from like a reliability, from a durability standpoint. So because I am a long-term user of the A7III, I was definitely a very early adopter of the camera. I figured I'd go ahead and do a long-term review, give you guys my thoughts, my experience with the camera, as well as talk about the things I think it does really well, and talk about some of the things I think it could definitely improve upon, and that would be good for you to know if you're considering this camera. And then from there, you guys can use that information hopefully to make a determination as to whether or not this would be the right camera for you. Before we jump into specifics on the camera itself, just kind of give you guys a little bit of context. So before getting the A7 III, I was primarily a Canon shooter. I had a 5D Mark III. That was my go-to body for quite a while. And it was a great camera, don't get me wrong. I definitely got some great images out of it, but I definitely had my eye on Sony. I was really interested in a lot of the features that they had. And so when the A7 III was released, it seemed like the right camera for me. So I rented it for a few days, tried it out, really enjoyed shooting with it. So once I returned it to the rental house, I went ahead and picked up my own copy, and it's been my go-to camera ever since. So I've been using it for all my weddings, all my portraits, cityscape, landscape, all that stuff. So I do have quite a bit of experience with it. So hopefully this video will be useful for you guys. And yeah, so let's go ahead and jump into some more specifics about the camera and talk about some of the things I think it does really well, as well as, again, some of the things I think it could improve upon. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is the autofocus in the A7 III. In my opinion, it's probably one of the best that's out there still. In my use, it's always been incredibly reliable. It focuses very quickly, and it's just consistently accurate from shoot to shoot. And that's not just in good light, it's also in really poor, dimly lit situations as well. Again, doing a lot of weddings, I find myself at wedding receptions, and the camera just does a fantastic job even when it's very dimly lit and dark. You know, it tracks faces still, it acquires focus very quickly, and it's just accurate time and time again. I definitely noticed a big change coming from the 5D III to the Sony A7 III in terms of the number of like tack sharp in focus images at the end of every session. So it's just been a really solid performer all around, just in general autofocus. Also with the eye autofocus, that was a really big draw for me to come over from Canon over to Sony, and definitely one of the features I was really interested in. Again, doing lots of portraits, lots of like couples portraits, and just photographing a lot of people in general. That was definitely a big feature for me, and it definitely did not disappoint. I really sped up my workflow during those shoots a lot, allowed me to focus more on communicating with the couple or the model and less on like focus and recompose and other issues like that. So it was definitely a much appreciated feature set on the Sony A7 III, and definitely one I've really loved. And then Sony really only just improved upon it and made it better when they released the firmware update a few months ago to enable real-time AF, so that was another big improvement. So yeah, all around in those regards, fantastic camera. The last autofocus thing we'll talk about is video autofocus. From my use case, it's always been really great. I came from Canon, I used their dual pixel AF, I knew how great that system was. So moving over to Sony, I was a little bit curious as to whether or not it would hold its own. And in my experience, it definitely has. For the work that I do, for the video work I do, I find the video autofocus in the Sony A7 III to be great for what I work with. So all around autofocus, A7 III, to me, it's a fantastic system. I definitely have no issues recommending it to anybody for whatever type of work that you do. Okay, so moving along, we're gonna talk about the EVF next. The main reason I wanna bring this up is not because of how great it is, but simply because it does get a lot of grief online for being not the best. And certainly on paper, it definitely is not the highest resolution EVF compared to most of the other mirrorless cameras that are out there. But I will say that from a day-to-day usability standpoint, it's more than adequate. I've never found myself in a situation where I felt like the EVF was holding me back in any way. And I do have an A7R III in addition to the A7 III. I'm actually filming this on the R3 right now. And the R3 definitely has a higher resolution EVF, but when I run both cameras side by side at weddings, which I do pretty often, when I'm switching back and forth between the two of them, I never really notice a difference in the EVF. Yes, if you were to slow down for a minute and really try to compare the two of them next to each other, yeah, you can definitely find the difference. But again, just from a day-to-day usability standpoint, the EVF in the A7 III is more than usable, it's more than adequate. I don't think you'll be disappointed with it. Okay, so next up is image quality. Again, image quality out of the A7 III, I think it does a fantastic job. I primarily shoot in compressed RAW rather than uncompressed. When I first got the camera, I kind of compared the two, and I never really noticed a huge difference between them unless I was shooting in like a really high dynamic range situation. So for me, primarily because I do a lot of weddings, a lot of volume shooting, I shoot in compressed RAW for smaller file sizes. And for me, I've always found those files to be more than adequate. You still get a lot of latitude to push and pull them, bring down highlights, boost the shadows, whatever you want to do. The files, the colors look great to me straight out of camera. Again, coming from Canon, They're definitely very well known for their color science, but for me, I never really noticed a big difference. I've always been happy with the color straight out of camera from the Sony cameras. And again, I shoot in RAW anyway, so I edit them. And again, I find that the files, they take to editing very well. You can color them the way you want. And in the end, I'm definitely always able to get a look and feel to my Sony files that I'm more than happy with. So overall, image quality, A7 III, I think is great. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is durability and reliability. I feel like this is kind of a big one. I think a lot of people feel like because the Sony A7 III is kind of the low end of the spectrum as far as the Sony cameras, they're a little bit worried that maybe it may not be up to par as far as holding its own for durability, reliability in the long run. But from my experience, the A7 III has been nothing but reliable. I've had zero issues with it. It's never locked up on me. It's never overheated. I've never had to do a battery pull. I've had it out in the heat, the cold, the rain, the snow, and it's just always worked for me from shoot to shoot. Never had a single problem with it. I know recently there's been talk about the A7 III having a shutter issue as well. Again, that's not something I've ever experienced. I think I've got somewhere between 150 to 175,000 shutter actuations based on the last time I checked. And so I definitely have quite a bit of mileage on it. And for me, I've never had a single shutter issue. And I also know a lot of people who have Sony A7 IIIs who also bought them right when they first came out. And as far as I know, none of them have ever had an issue either. So again, I'm only one data point, so take it for what it's worth. But from my experience, the Sony A7 III has been incredibly reliable, and I have no issue with recommending it to somebody for professional work. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about for the A7 III is the ability to customize it. You definitely get a lot of custom function buttons, and then just in general, pretty much every button on the camera, you can pretty much remap, reprogram to do pretty much whatever you want to do with it. There's a few limitations in there, but generally speaking, Sony gives you a lot of latitude to really make the camera your own. And to me, I think that's great. You know, we all have different workflows, we all have different shooting styles, we've got different priorities. So to be able to go in and remap the camera and make it your own and fit the way you shoot, and to have the settings that mean the most to you and that are most important to you right up front, I think that's really great. And again, coming from the Canon on the 5D3, you're really limited in what you could do there. And coming over to the Sony, it was really refreshing to have the ability to really make the camera your own. And I definitely think that's a huge improvement in terms of being able to, again, make you a little bit more efficient in whatever you're shooting. And just in general, I really appreciate it. I think it's a great feature. All right, so another thing I want to talk about really quick is battery life. I feel like there's still a misconception out there with a lot of people that mirrorless cameras have poor battery life. And really with any of the new Sony cameras, anything that has a Z series battery, if you're still on a DSLR, if you switch over to the Sony with a Z series battery, I think you'll find that your battery life on the Sony is comparable to your DSLR. To give you some sort of reference, for me, if I'm shooting on just the A7 III, that's the only camera I'm using for a wedding day, I'll typically go through one full battery for most of the day, and then usually at some point during the beginning part of the reception, I've got to swap out to battery number 2. And then that second battery usually will last me, will definitely last me until the end of the evening, until the wedding is over. And that second battery, I usually go through like 15, 20, maybe 25% of that battery. So just in general, for me, if I'm using just one camera, I still never go through 2 batteries in a wedding day. So the battery life is definitely very much more comparable to a DSLR than the early mirrorless cameras were. And so if it's something that you're worried about, if it's something you've been concerned, that your battery's gonna be poor, honestly, don't worry about it. The battery life in the A7 III is fantastic. You should have no complaints there. Okay, so let's go ahead and change gears a little bit and talk about some of the things that the A7 III maybe doesn't do so well. There's definitely a few of them, and I think it's important to understand them before you commit to getting either a Sony in general or specifically the Sony A7 III. So the first thing I want to talk about is ergonomics. I know for some people that's really important. Again, coming from Canon, I know I keep referencing them, but it's kind of like it's what I shot on before I had the Sony. And also just in general, I think the Canons definitely do ergonomics very well. To me, their cameras always feel the best in my hand. The button layouts feel very sensible. On the Sony, there's definitely room for improvement. It's definitely by far not the worst. I think they do a good job. It's just not the best. In my experience, the Sony, it's a little bit small for my taste. I wish the grip was a little bit bigger. Again, Sony's kind of improving this from generation to generation, but on the A7 III, it's still a little bit small. There's more to be desired in my opinion. Button layouts can maybe be a little bit better. Dial layouts can maybe be a little bit better, but it's something to be aware of. Again, just try it out, shoot with it for a day or two, maybe rent it, see if it's gonna be okay for you or if it's a deal breaker. If ergonomics are really important to you, again, maybe the Sony may not be your choice, but for me, it really wasn't that big of a deal. So just, again, something to be aware of before you pick one up. So next up is the AF area mode indicator, the little box that shows you where your AF area mode is, where your area focus point is, you guys would get what I'm saying, right? So if you're in anything other than AF wide, so if you're in AF flexible spot, AF center, AF, you know, area zone, whatever you want to call it, you're going to get a little gray box that shows you where your autofocus area is. And again, it's a very dark gray box and it blends into almost every single scene that you're in. It's very difficult to pick up through the EVF or even on the back LCD. And 100%, there's definitely been times when I've missed photos because I could not find where my area was, my AF area mode indicator was. So you end up having to use the joystick to move it around a little bit, or trigger the autofocus so the box lights up green really quick and then you can find it that way. But 100%, I've definitely have missed photos and moments at weddings because I didn't know where it was. And in like the 1 to 2 seconds it takes you to find it, the moment's gone, you've missed it. So definitely a huge limitation there. It's been something that I've been hoping Sony would fix via a firmware update and allow you to change it to a different color. As of yet, they haven't. The newer Sonys, they're definitely starting to fix this, but as of yet, the older Sonys like the A7III, the A7R III, they have not pushed out a firmware update to correct that. So again, something that I think is important to know before picking up an A7 III. So just be aware of it and take that into consideration before you go ahead and invest in an A7 III. Okay, so another huge usability issue in my opinion is the buffer speed and the software, the way the software works while the camera's writing images from the buffer to the card. So basically the issue in kind of a nutshell is that when the camera is writing images from the buffer to the memory card, there's certain settings that you can't change while that's occurring. So to give you an example, a situation I often found myself in when I first got the camera was I would be in, say, like AF area wide, and you know, something would be happening at a wedding. I'd fire off, you know, 6 or 7 images, and then I would realize that maybe for some of the images the camera's not quite focusing where I want it to. So in order to correct that, I want to change it from AF wide to like AF single point. But while the camera is writing images from the buffer to the card, you can't do that. If you try to hit the button to make that change, it'll give you an error message that pops up saying it's not available or something along those lines, and it's just really frustrating in a lot of cases. And unfortunately, that's not the only example. There's actually quite a few settings that you get locked out of while the camera's writing those images from the buffer to the card. So it's definitely a huge limitation. Again, it's something I've been hoping all along that Sony would fix via a firmware update, but as of yet, it's still an issue in every single Sony camera. So again, something to be aware of. I think it's important to know that before jumping over to the Sony brand. Again, just be aware of it. All right, so the next one is for the hybrid shooters out there, and more specifically, if you're a hybrid shooter who does photo and video at an event where you need to be able to switch between the two of them as quickly as possible, again, the Sony A7 III may not be the camera for you. In order to change from video to photo or photo to video, you got to use the dial up top. It's kind of a slow process. You can't really do it very quickly. And so if you're somebody who really needs to switch between those two modes in the quickest amount of time possible, like if you're doing like photo and video at a wedding, for instance, then again, Sony A7 III may not be the right camera for you. For me, it's never really been a big issue because I don't really shoot that way, but I know there's a lot of people out there who do, and who more and more people are starting to shoot that way. So again, just something to be aware of. All right, guys, so that's really kind of the main points I wanted to hit in this video. That really covers the main things that I think the camera does really well, as well as a few things I think it definitely needs to be improved upon and that you should know before picking up an A7 III. I will say that I think Sony's definitely doing a decent job of upgrading the camera and fixing a lot of these issues from generation to generation, and where they can, they definitely seem to be improving things via firmware updates. I definitely would love to see some of these other things, like the AF area mode color and then the buffer issue. I'd love to see those be corrected via a firmware update for the A7 III, but again, as of yet, they have not. Just be aware of them before you pick up the camera. Maybe there'll be an issue for you, maybe they won't. Another obviously good option would always be to rent the camera, try it out for a few days, see if these issues are really deal breakers for you or not, and if they're not, then go ahead and pick up the A7 III. But either way, I still think it's a fantastic camera. I have zero regrets switching over to it. It's been great for me, and I think most people who purchase it will definitely be happy with it. I definitely believe it's still a great buy in the end of 2019, early 2020. In my opinion, it's still a beast of a camera. If you pick it up, you're gonna get still plenty of years of great images out of it, great video out of it. I mean, it produces solid photos, it produces solid video. I think you'll be more than happy with it no matter what type of work that you do. So again, hopefully all these things, you can kind of take them into consideration as far as whether or not it's gonna be the right camera for you. One thing I will say though is if you are thinking about buying this camera in like late 2019, early 2020, What I would say is if you don't need the camera right away, maybe hold off a couple months until like maybe the end of February, early March 2020. The A7R4 was released almost 2 years to the date of the A7R3. So I think there's a good opportunity or a good chance that the A7 IV will be released 2 years to the date of the A7 III. So we should see an announcement sometime, like I said, the end of February, early March. And what I'm getting at is if they do make that announcement and the A7 IV comes out and you want to get an A7 III, the A7 III price will probably drop down to about $1,300 or $1,400 at that point. So that means you'll be able to get a brand new version of it for $1,400, which I think will be a hell of a deal. So if you don't need the camera right away, hold off a little bit and maybe you'll get a good deal on it. But that's gonna be it for this video, guys. Hopefully you guys found the information useful. If you did, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. If you wanna see more videos like this, I definitely plan on putting out more content here into early 2020. I've got a lot more time on my hands coming up in the next few weeks and the next couple of months. So more videos like this will be coming out soon. So if you wanna see them, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And if you guys have questions, comments, anything like that, leave them in the comment section down below. Other than that, guys, that's gonna be it for this video. So until next time, stay safe, keep shooting, have a happy new year, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.